We'd like to begin today by talking about STEM education more broadly here in the state of Virginia. Now, you probably all know that in July, Governor Northam signed Executive Order 36, which established Virginia Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math Education Commission. So what does that mean to you as educators? Well, we're very fortunate today to have two experts who can tell us all about the commission and the work that it will do going forward. Dr. Tina Mangle Ma is the Director of STEM Education at the Virginia Department of Education, and her colleague, Mr. Charles English, is the STEM Coordinator for the Virginia Science Museum. Dr. Mangle Ma's background is in the areas of educational technology, online and blended learning, program innovation, computer science, and health education. Mr. English has designed, developed, and supported new and innovative programs in schools, school districts, and informal education centers in several states. Together, they're going to engage you this morning on STEM, the state STEM plan, and they want this to be an interactive session and take your questions afterwards. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Mangle Ma and Mr. Charles English.
Good morning, everyone. Ooh, that came across louder than I expected. So, first of all, I do usually go by Chuck English, so feel free just to call me Chuck. But I'm going to introduce a little bit more about myself here in a minute. I wanted to start by asking Dr. Mangle Ma to introduce herself.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here this morning. I am the Director of STEM and Innovation, that trendy word that's out there, over at the Department of Education. I've been in this position for 2.5 years. And in those 2.5 years, we've done some really great things up at the Department of Education. But just like you guys, I was a teacher for a really long time. I was a secondary science teacher. I taught biology, chemistry, marine biology, oceanography, earth science. So you name it, I taught it except for physics. Really love science, and then from there I went into educational technology and really found my wheelhouse there because I really see how technology really supports our work, especially in the area of STEM. So I've had quite a background in education. I was counting the number of years I've been in education, and it has been 21 years. That blows my mind. But it's a pleasure being here this morning. At the Department of Ed, I do oversee pedagogical STEM, and we're pushing forward with that, and I'd like to say that that man right there is my partner in crime, moving forward with STEM education in Virginia. But I also oversee, just for teachers in this room, science, mathematics, computer science, and all educational technology, Virtual Virginia, so for our online teaching, our open educational resource repository work, health and PE, driver's education, and governors and gifted. So I'm the person to contact if you ever have any questions or need any support in that area, okay, or those areas.
So my background is definitely different than what she is doing. And the one thing that I did teach is I taught high school physics, so the one category you did not teach. So my background stemmed back and forth between formal education and informal education. So I've worked in a couple different states as an educator, mostly high school, some college, but I've worked a lot of museums as well. And I moved to Virginia about 7 years ago to become, and actually I missed this title, the Director of Playful Learning and Inquiry at the Science Museum of Virginia. I left that title because I had an opportunity to go a little bit further than that. I've worked with the museum for a while, and I had a chance to meet a lot of different people that are doing great things around the state, and especially in the STEM area. When I saw that, and the state was starting to look at how can we better coordinate some of the efforts that are going around the state, they needed a person in a science coordinator position. And I actually had a fun time writing what that job description looked like, and after I was done, I decided to go for it. And what that is a person to go around and find out what is happening. The state is doing fantastic things. So when I was a science educator at the museum, I was seeing schools and how they implemented STEM. I was talking to other museums. I was talking to after-school programs. I was talking to communities that wanted to see STEM happen in their neighborhood and what that would look like. So in my role now, I get to go around and listen to a lot of the stories. I get to be, for lack of a better term, professional glue and stick people to other ideas and other people to kind of see what is working. Because for all the things that we are doing, none of it's coordinated. There are a lot of people doing great things, but they're spending their own time, money, energy, and resources trying to redevelop it themselves rather than actually working together. So trying to align those efforts and trying to get that all pulled together is what my job became. And then to do that, I became one voice in a series of many voices. There are a lot of people out there trying to coordinate small efforts in communities. There are a lot of regions, superintendents' regions that had STEM meetings. There's some universities trying to pull together some of these meetings. There's conferences like this. So in order to move this forward, we needed a STEM commission. So Tina and I worked together on some drafts, and we're going to share with you later today some of the draft pieces that we put to kind of convince the governor, the Secretary of Education, the state superintendent that we needed a commission, because if we had voices from around the states, voices like yours, and other people that cannot be here, it would help us decide how to best move forward in terms of making a plan with a mission and vision, with aspirational goals we can aim everybody towards, so that way we can make sure we are more aligned and that we are using some common language. So having said that, what I'd like to do is get you guys to start with a small opinion piece at your tables. Not with the Post-it notes yet. I want you to think about, what do you think STEM is? And just yesterday, I heard various definitions. Not that any of them were wrong. It's how your school district, your classroom, it's how your school itself is interpreting STEM and using it. I'm kind of curious about what you think STEM is, and at your tables, what I would like you to do is come up with what you think the #1 best definition for STEM is on a Post-it note. So you got to keep it short enough to fit on a Post-it note. I've seen what the political definitions look like, and they're a page long. And then I would like you to also highlight on a second Post-it note, what are the main differences between your different definitions of STEM at your table? And those differences are what we need to get to at some point. So I'm going to give everybody about 3.5 minutes to kind of see if you can come up with the definition and some of the
3.5
differences.
minutes.
If I can ask everyone to stop. So first of all, thank you. I was wondering if this group was going to be as willing to be able to jump into a conversation that quickly with that short time frame, and everybody did. So first of all, I appreciate that. The second part of that is that was a pretty tough question, because I can sit in a commission with 40 people that were asked to be there to speak specifically about STEM, and they're prepared to come in with their opinions, and boy, that took a day. That took a day to get to the point of what some of the common language and terms were, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well, but it takes a while to kind of define that. Now I'll say the advantage to this group is that you're all here focused on education, and you're all here focused, for the most part, I do realize that there are people in high school and people maybe pre-K, but for the most part within a range of students that you know that you need to kind of get inspired and excited about STEM at an earlier age. So I think that that may influence some of your work. But just going around listening to what everybody was talking about, it was pretty fascinating to hear some of the same language that was coming from around these tables. I would like to, and you don't have to, but I would like to collect these afterwards just so I have some of these definitions I can work off of if you're willing to share that with me. I do not need names on this, so if you wrote it with your name on it, you don't want to be named to it, please scratch it out or rewrite it. But is there anyone willing to share their definition first? And before you answer that, I do have a couple people with microphones, so we can also capture your voice on the recording, but is there someone willing to share their definition? In the back.
STEM's a method to problem solve authentic tasks that allows the teacher to facilitate while students own their learning while working in teams through collaboration and creative thinking.
Okay. Does anyone have a different definition? Yeah, I have one back there in a white shirt. Back that way. And there's going to be one up here then too.
Okay, Star Table, we talked about it. It's an integrated approach to cross-curricular teaching in the classroom using hands-on experiential learning with all students to reach maximum academic growth.
Excellent, thank you. And last one right here.
Melding of the 4 disciplines is an approach and/or process to learning.
Okay. So we had 3 different definitions, and I'll see if we can get to the rest here in a minute. They all said something really good towards STEM and something that we do need to acknowledge. I'll say the one thing that I think is really important for my role, and I believe Tina would agree with me, so feel free to interrupt if you don't, but that our job isn't to necessarily push everyone has to do it one way. We're going to be trying to build this up so that way there are regional sort of hubs and understanding of this. STEM does need to be relevant to the people in that community and to your schools and to how you're doing this. So there is going to be difference. You'll not hear me say STEAM. I am STEM, it's on my business card, so I'm going to stick with that. But is there a place for it? Yes. But I also have other thoughts about that, and I'll talk about that in a bit too. There are different ways of doing this, so I'm not going to say, no, that definition is wrong. My idea is to make sure that we come up with something that, even though your definition may be different, aims towards the same general goals and the general definition that the state needs to put there in front, because right now we don't have a front. Right now, the state is #1 in business and the #1 in education according to CNBC, but we don't have a front for what STEM looks like, so everyone's interpreting this on their own. Now, what I'd like to do is ask a couple tables, if you had a chance to talk about what are the differences that were in your definitions. Can you please tell me some of the differences that you noticed as you were talking at your tables? Anyone willing to volunteer that? Yes, someone? What?
Good. Cyclical versus formulaic. Cyclical in the process of, it's more of a process that goes around and around, versus formulaic, it's more linear, straight back and forth.
So cyclical versus formulaic, or more linear. All right, so that's one difference that I heard there. Anybody else? Over here again? Okay, you can hold it. I know we're just trying to make sure that we capture it. Thank you.
I think there's a difference between age groups. Elementary's version of STEAM is a little bit different than middle and high school, just based on what they're doing in those areas where it's more technological. In elementary, you just focus on really like the 5 C's and the general engineering process, whereas in high school they dig a lot, in middle school they dig a lot deeper into those areas. So the definition is different depending on the ages.
Okay. I'll say that was probably the biggest thing in terms of talking with the commission, is that we had big differences between your workforce development, higher education, which we're also working with, and K-12 education. So there are differences between that, but there are also a lot of similarities.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point about the grade levels and what you see. When you're talking about true integration of STEM content together in order to produce some sort of product or process, you have to have strong foundations of math, and it's not all the time, but there's a foundation that has to exist. And in elementary, we're growing those. So you're really talking about helping them learn how to be, what is the scientific inquiry process? What is the engineering design process? Computational thinkers is what we're doing at elementary school, and really, really helping them dig down deep as they get to middle school and high school. We're going to talk a little bit later about how we're at the State Department, and actually in Region 2, starting to develop what the look-fors are for high-quality STEM education. What does it look like in elementary versus middle school and high school? Because it should look a little bit different. And then really digging down deep and saying, what does it look like at the classroom level versus the school level? Because I think when you talk about what does it look like when the whole school is really doing high quality STEM education, that's our biggest challenge, because we know we have pockets of innovation going on, but how do we get it to be a whole school culture and part of our curriculum?
So I'd say that the biggest thing that we really need to start with is common language. One of the things I like to point out is STEM as a job. What counts as a STEM job? Just to let you know, the federal agencies, whether you're talking about the Department of Labor, Department of Defense, Department of Education, all define STEM jobs differently. On December 3rd of 2018, the Office of Technology and Science Policy, if I got that right, came out with their White House STEM report. And that STEM report had 4 aspirational goals in it as well. It's actually a pretty quick read, but I'll give you my contact information later on. If you want my 2-page synopsis, I'll gladly send that out. But what it came out with was something that I thought was more important, and that's the follow-up. That's supposed to be coming out any time now. And that follow-up is supposed to include all 17 federal agencies that are going to come up with how they're addressing STEM. And to do that, that means that they also need to come out with common language. Common language of what is a student of need. Common language for what is a STEM career. And once that's done, we're going to be able to work off of a model that people at the federal level have. So that was supposed to be out by now. There have been a few delays for a multiple set of reasons, but those definitions are hard to work on. And honestly, I do know some of the people on that commission as well. They're having a hard time sort of wrestling with what does that look like. But I think that will also help us decide what do we need to be looking at for some of it. So there is information coming down the pipeline, something that you can all access. The other thing is there are over 60 variations of STEM. The one example I like to give of that are the 6 variations of A in this state alone. So we have, in some places, agriculture. We have architecture. There's a STEAM academy where it's applied math. There is arts as in fine arts, arts as in humanities, which at that point is education. I'm trying to think, oh my gosh, I forgot the 6th A.
There's also advanced mathematics.
Thank you, advanced mathematics. So the fact is that once you have to define it each time, you're starting to lose that. But there are academies or colleges or schools defining it all differently. So that's one of the reasons to put in there. But there's a lot of STEM, STEAM, I for innovation is out there. G, I've heard G for both girls in STEM and for GIS. So there's a lot out there. And it's just important that we start using some of the common language so we do know what we're talking about on some of it. It's also important to recognize STEM as more than an activity. And this is where I get to use my daughter, who's 12 years old, as a guinea pig. I've enrolled her into more STEM programs around the states than she probably ever cares to think about. And the number of activities she's done that have not elevated in a STEM class is surprising, because a lot of these activities can be. It's taking an activity much like the spaghetti tower that she's built at least a half dozen times, and starting talking about, let's talk about the efficiency. Let's talk about the design. Let's talk about structure and shape. Let's talk about measurements and tools to be able to do that effectively. Let's go through an iterative process and talk about the design process and doing it again. There are things you can do to elevate it. The problem is that it's too easy to make this a fun activity and to not elevate it. So it's important that when we talk about quality STEM that we're putting in those other disciplines and giving someone an opportunity to apply it, because that's the magical moment for a lot of students. I'm applying these skills and this knowledge. I'm seeing where it fits. I just want to make sure I don't send someone off to an engineering college and realizing it's not spaghetti towers. So that's just the example of, we just need to make sure that they understand that there is something behind this and we elevate that. And that I heard some of the language that was used earlier, that we're integrating STEM. And it's not just tacked on. Math is probably the best example for that. I've seen math tacked onto more activities as a measurement. We're collecting data. That counts as math. We're putting it into a chart or a graph of some sort. How do we make sure that we're using data-driven decision making and actually integrating it a little bit more, talking about math at other levels? So how do we make sure that we are truly making these activities STEM? The other part is STEM delivery. When I've gone around the state, I can tell you that there is such a wide range of how school districts are doing this, and it's incredible. And a lot of them are really great. Some are making sure that it's a decision district-wide thing, that everyone is going to try to elevate STEM, and they have STEM coaches in all the elementary schools and middle schools and trying to work on that. One school district, I'll remain nameless, even put out a survey to parents thinking about starting a STEM academy, and they realized that enough parents thought it was important enough that they decided that rather than an academy, they just needed to make sure it was in all the schools. Because I've seen STEM more often as an after-school program. I've seen it more often as just a gifted class. And I think this is an opportunity that we can get everyone excited about applying that knowledge in different ways. Taking the skills that you're learning in your science and your math class and your engineering design, using technology in innovative ways so that way you're seeing how to use these skills in new and innovative ways. I think that's what's going to get us to the next point in STEM, get a look at that sort of pedagogical shift and seeing that it's truly integrated.
And as we speak to equity across our state, that should be at our heart of what we do as educators. It's not just about our gifted students who get the opportunity to go and code robots. It's not just the students who have the mom and dads that can pick them up from the after-school activity or before-school activity, or know about the camps, are educated enough to find out where the camps are and put their students in camps. Unless this is something that is integrated throughout our school day in a meaningful way, we are not going to reach equity across the state. And that goes to the fact that if we catch them young, we're showing the research. If you integrate in K-5, the number of girls that sustain in a STEM field grow exponentially. The number of underserved and underrepresented students grows exponentially. So that's our call as educators. And I just want to go back to the whole STEAM, STEM plus H, STEM plus C. And I think it's really important that we realize that why do we use the different, why is there STEM, right? So when I think of dance, sometimes I use the mechanics of science as I dance, but we don't always approach it, we don't always talk about it, we dance. Or we do our art, and we don't always talk about the mathematics involved in that, or potentially, you know, the science involved in it when you talk about colors and things like that. But I challenge you to think about an engineering design process that doesn't integrate technology, science, and math. Those 4 content areas integrate together so well and so meaningfully. That's why it's STEM. Now we can do STEAM activities, that's valid, but you also don't want to integrate and force a fit, right? You don't want to do an art activity and force it when it doesn't necessarily integrate with the science and the mathematics. So we have to be really thoughtful when we use these different acronyms and not lose sight of why STEM is STEM. That's so important. And if true integration is going to take place, it has to be meaningful integration. If we want our kids to learn more deeply, then we have to ensure that we're providing them with the content that fits together so they can apply it in meaningful, real-world, relevant ways. I can force something, but it may not be real-world or relevant, right? They can see through that. So as teachers, as educators, these are things we have to think about when we're creating our units and our lessons, when we're collaborating together, when we're thinking about these amazing projects we do with kids. Let's not force a fit. Okay, let's make it meaningful.
So I'm going to go quickly over what we started with as a draft. Whenever we needed to kind of talk to the Secretary of Education, the governor, and to the state superintendent, we came up with a draft of several different pieces. And I will admit it's a draft, and I liberated the mission and vision from other places, but at least give you a start. The commission right now is meeting later this fall and is actually going to start voting on what does our mission and vision look like and our core values. I started with one from the Science Museum since I work there. It's real easy to read and to remember. So it's a matter of to inspire Virginians to enrich their lives through STEM. That's real easy to kind of do. And it's more than just education. And my job is more than just education, but all that should be in support of education. Parents need to better understand STEM if they're going to support their students. For all the enthusiasm those kids get when they go home, it needs to be supported if they're going to keep that or that's going to wane. So what does that look like, and what does that look like in the community? For Virginia's STEM vision, we're not going to do Post-it notes. I'm not going to take this long, but what do you think should be part of the vision? Where do you see STEM education in 5 years? I'm just going to give you 2 minutes real quick at your tables. We'll talk about what do you think you need to see in 5 years in STEM education. What would be your vision for the states? 2 minutes.
Where are you guys at? Where are you at? Queensboro. Kids make those connections. Another thing that we want to try to push is for those STEM before their divisions or where they want to prioritize.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen,
Like 18, we're trying to push
just try to pull you back.
that.
I've seen mission and vision done a lot of different ways. And I've seen a lot of people pull together different pieces of it. And in fact, I've even been told sometimes that depending on the model you use, it looks flipped, mission and vision, for how we have it set up right now. So I'll say the commission is also talking about that. But when it comes to a vision and what we're going to be able to do in 5 years and where we're going to be in 5 years, that is very interesting dialogue among educators versus people outside of just education. So before I ask for some of your responses, some of the things that I've heard from some of the businesses and corporations that we have involved is that pipeline. We need people actually going into the fields where we're having jobs, where we have empty spots, where we need to fill this in, where we're having to import people from outside of the state just to fill the jobs that we have. This state has a lot of need in that. And in fact, it's amazing how quickly we're growing in some of those areas. Amazon moving their headquarters number 2 here is 25,000 jobs they're going to need to fill, a lot of them in high tech. I'll put the statistics of how many we have in the States, but that's an example. Depending on how you interpret STEM jobs, there's a lot of jobs in construction and associate degree jobs in manufacturing because you need certain certifications to be able to handle some of the stuff. The Commonwealth Center for Advanced Manufacturing talks about how many jobs they're short, and that does not fit in the whole cybersecurity and tech support that's needed in Northern Virginia. This is people running a manufacturing floor and the robots that they're using now. This is people at Newport News shipbuilding that need STEM jobs. So it's broadening a definition. When we started talking about vision, it's amazing how many people there started talking about making sure that we actually cast a much wider net in terms of what is STEM and what do we need to fill that out. Can I have just a couple people share what they saw as a vision before I throw up a draft example that we had? Anyone willing to share? Yes. And there's a microphone.
Yeah, we had 3 visions. One was interdisciplinary collaboration between teachers.
Mm-hmm.
The second was a redesign of SOLs with a STEM or inquiry model. And the third was funding for positions in the districts.
Excellent, thank you. Actually, very common, and I'm going to give a small head. Do you want to talk about the potential of what it would look like STEM and SOLs, or do you want to wait on that?
If we have time, I'll be really quick, and you can talk to me afterwards. My big vision is to really start adopting our standards and grade bands. So K through 2 standards get adopted all together. 3 through 5 get adopted all together to allow for better curriculum mapping. And I heard what you said over here, and I agree with you 100%. So I don't mean to call her out, but she was saying it's really hard when I'm teaching science to authentically integrate mathematics because we're teaching it at different times. So I think if we do this work from the state, we can really support your efforts at the grassroots level to make STEM integration a higher possibility. And I think that we're doing a lot of leadership work. Now, why is leadership work so important? So when you talk about creating what a STEM classroom, schools, divisions look like, giving schools STEM designations, which leaders love that kind of stuff. I want to be a STEM school, right? You know, and then they start to make that a priority, and then therefore they think creatively with their staffing needs. So how do we take already SOQ positions, instructional coaches, ITRTs, and make them maybe STEM leads in schools, or rethink how we do science coordinator positions at the division level to support more STEM? But there are creative ways to do that. I can't promise anything about funding because we all know how that goes, but I think if we think creatively and do other things, we can make your vision a reality.
That's in part my job, though, so if there are enough people saying that this is what it takes to do that, I at least get to put that into a STEM plan. Doesn't mean it all gets approved, but at least someone has to read that kind of going, oh, that's a budget item that has been requested. But that's part of my job.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to jump right to the vision that we looked at, and that was from Oregon. Believe it or not, it went defunct They had a great STEM plan, and it was based purely in politics rather than getting a whole commission and a group on that, so we're trying to avoid that. But if you just looked at, we highlighted some parts that we thought were really important, because we're talking about reimagining and transforming, enhancing STEM-enabled skills and mindsets. When you look at the 4 bullet points, we talked about prosperity of individuals and communities, lifelong learners, being able to contribute, and it includes workforce and industry. So that way, it's not education standing out on their own. We're talking about truly changing a culture and getting everyone's buy-in through the whole system. So we are trying to look at this broadly, and we are trying to think of it on that big of a level. Just to let you know, I see people taking pictures. One, I want to reiterate that it's a draft. It's going to change. However, I'll try to make sure that this PowerPoint is shared so that way it can be shared with all of you. You can look it up later on. I'm also giving you my contact information, so you can always ask, hey, what is coming on down the pipeline now? So we will share some of that. The goals, we actually created 4 goals that we wanted to start with too, and these are also in draft form and will likely change. But if you go through them, the first one is focused on knowledge, skills, and mindsets. The second one is equitable opportunities. I'll tell you, that's a fascinating thing to look at across the state, because the state is fairly large, and I don't think a lot of people look up enough to realize the breadth in the state, from the cities and the districts with a high amount of population versus the rural regions. If you actually map rural versus suburban versus urban in this state, you'd be amazed at how much of it is considered rural, and yet suburban alone is 48% of the student population. And that's just suburban, that's not urban. So we have some huge differences across the state on what accessibility to quality STEM looks like. And the last part, well, not the last part, partnerships is a big part of this, because I talked about us doing a lot of different things. We need to coordinate some of those efforts and talk about sustainable supportive conditions. That's why Tina and I are working together. I want to make sure what's happening outside of DOE is supported by everything external, and that if she or I were to try to do this independent from each other, it wouldn't kind of grow together. It needs to be able to be supportive and grow together. And that's why she and I are trying to make sure that we're working together on all the different parts.
And I'm just going to touch on the fact that this STEM plan is not just K-12, right? It is really looking at all Virginians. So when you look at every single one of those goals, why is it important to increase the content and knowledge of even our parents and our community members? Why is it important to provide equitable opportunities across the whole, what we call STEM landscape? So this really is for all, but it fits into every different pocket.
So the STEM Commission, it was announced earlier, July 17th is when the executive order was actually signed. Within 3 weeks of that executive order, we had more than 80% of the STEM Commission people meet. I was actually kind of surprised. We have a good dedicated team of people that are willing to kind of get together on this right away to make sure that we start this. And we've been given a year to really work on the first main charge. So, and we started that first meeting with the common language, because it's hard to talk to a group of people if we're all still defining everything differently. Our current charge is kind of a touring listening piece of this. In fact, I have a grant, and I really need help with this. The commission's got a lot of active people on it. We made sure that there are 40 representatives from every superintendent's region across the states, and from a whole bunch of different job sectors that are stakeholders in STEM. But that does not mean that we're getting everyone's voice. So I'm going to be setting up 5 rural regional meetings across the states, and I need to set that up in places where I do not have great contacts, at least not yet. So I'm going to be looking to set some of these meetings up, so that way we make sure Southwestern Virginia has a voice in this, and that I hear their perspectives, that South Central and even kind of, Southeastern and some of the Tidewater region that is not always heard from. I need to make sure the peninsula is heard, and that the Appalachian Highlands area is also heard from. There are parts of the state that need to be represented, so I will be asking for help on trying to make some of those contacts and make sure I have those meetings in different places. I want to make sure that everyone is bought into this, because at this point, if we don't, then it just comes from Richmond, and not everyone feels like they're part of the planning. I'm doing a data collection and landscape analysis that is slowly becoming a very fun challenge. How far do you go when you talk about STEM? Is it any STEM activity that we're doing? Is it the number of hours of contact that you have with the students? At what level do you stop at? So we're going to have fun, and hopefully June 2020, which is the last thing, my report and plan will come out by then, and it should be public. So then at that point, you'll have something fun to read, and you can kind of figure out how we actually collect the data. And tell me, Chuck, you forgot this piece, or you should include this, or talk to this person. That's always going to be helpful, because I only know what I know. I need that outside perspective to continue to kind of grow in my understanding.
Can I, just from an
Yeah.
educator's standpoint, I always think, why is a governmental plan important to my work? And the way I feel my role is with the STEM Commission, with the STEM plan, is to make sure for every goal we have measurable outcomes. And when you have an outcome, then people want to meet that because it has to be measured. So I think that what we're trying to accomplish here, we're going to actually do, and that will then cipher down to our divisions and to the classroom level as well. And our actual K-12 education plan will align with this plan. So I think that you'll see, if you have governmental support and the governor supports this work and we have measurable outcomes, then I have to have measurable outcomes at the department level, and that'll get filtered down to the division. So please keep your eye out for this and try to align your work as closely to this as well.
So I mentioned I was going to throw out some statistics. Why is it an important thing to focus on? First of all, if you want to look it up, CNBC did actually create a wonderful ranking of all the states in the country, and we are #1 for jobs, for business. We are #1 for education. So to be able to stay in that, we need to kind of keep moving forward and pushing it. And a big part of why we're #1 in jobs and business and #1 in education is a lot of the growth and development that has happened in STEM. That includes computer science and the movements we've made there. We're kind of a state that's leading a lot of this movement. And despite that, we're still not always as coordinated as you'd think we should be for that. So we just need to make sure that we are continuing to work on that. And that we have over 400,000 STEM jobs now and expected to add 150,000 of them within the next 5 years. Think about 150,000 jobs. So that's what's predicted right now, just in job growth. That does not take in consideration even education. Let's think about this. 10,000 people turn 65 every single day in this country. How many people are going to be retiring that quickly? How many people are retiring out of jobs like Dominion Power and they need to replace there? We need to start thinking about these sort of jobs to be able to replace all that and getting people thinking about that. That's also one of the reasons why the new energy cluster is there as a career pathway as well. So, impediments. The last thing I wanted you to do with your Post-it notes for a couple minutes are, what are the road bumps or road blocks that prevent you from creating a more engaged, integrated STEM program in your school? Now, by all means, if you're willing to share these, this is one where you can use individual Post-it notes, and I would like to collect some of those, because us understanding what some of the roadblocks are, we're hearing stories from people that are engaged in STEM that are willing to come to Tina and I. That does not mean that we're getting a full and accurate vision for what are some of the things that prevent effective STEM programming. So I just want to give everyone just a couple minutes just to put down a few bullet points on a Post-it note that you'd be willing to share with Tina and I afterwards, and that we will collect. So 2 minutes again.
I've never seen people go for sticky notes so quickly. All right.
We're going to already talk to our assistant superintendent.
Thank you.
What's that?
One of the biggest frustrations, we are the STEM teachers in the district, and what we find is, so
STEM lessons like your MIPS and like your SIS, and what you're going to find in the Open Educational Resource Repository are lots of lessons, especially with computer science integration, which will help you with the overall integration, because computer science K-12, that would...
I was hoping to create a good dialogue, because we do need to find out some of the things we need to work on if we're going to succeed in our job. If we're going to try to move things forward, we need to identify these road bumps or road blocks, as I refer to it. What I found fascinating were the individuals that were just peeling off Post-it notes with thoughts on it like it was a small windstorm, and I was just seeing some of that go through. But that does help us look at some of the things that need to be addressed. It's one thing for us to be able to talk about a plan, but if we don't also talk about some of the things that are going to prevent that plan from happening and addressing that up front and finding solutions before we put forth a plan to some of those problems, it's not going to succeed. So if our goal is to really make this happen, we need to identify where those problems are up front and address them up front. So I do appreciate your inputs. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the next slide, but if I can ask help from the individuals to collect some of those Post-it notes, if you can gather them together at your tables, and if I can just collect those Post-it notes, I want to make sure not to necessarily call people out in front of a crowd with information like that. Now, while they're doing that, I want to talk about our timeline. So we do have a couple STEM Commission meetings that are going to happen this fall still. One actually on October 11th and one on December 3rd. December 3rd, we are going to be creating some smaller task force groups to be able to address some of these issues. Again, I'm going to be giving you my contact information. If you're interested in helping with the rural, regional meetings, or on one of these task force groups, please tell me so, but please also give me a little bit of background about where you're from and perspective on some of that, so that way I also know where we might be able to plug you in at if you're willing to help with some of it. I am going to be collecting what works and what does not work. This is a hard thing to get from schools, especially the what does not work part of this. Anytime someone from DOE asks for what's going on in STEM, what most schools are going to turn in are the positive things. What is working well? Where are we succeeding? Very rarely do we get someone saying, you know what, we've tried this and it did not work the way we expected. I need those stories too, because again, addressing some of the problems are going to help us make a better plan moving forward. So don't send that to DOE, send that to me. I don't work for them, but I don't have to turn it into anybody. In fact, my job's so weird, no one knows who to yell at me, so I can get away with almost anything.
I yell at them all the time.
Okay, she does, but she's not my boss, so that works out okay. The state touring, I already mentioned that. That's actually being sponsored because we are part of a national organization called STEMX. Battelle created STEMX, which has got 17 states working together on what does it look like to create state STEM plans and work on the policy level, and with 3 territories outside of the United States. We are now officially part of STEMX, and they're the ones that are sponsoring this because they saw that as something that they realized we needed to be able to succeed in our plan. So we're going to be collecting that. We're going to be talking about, and Tina brought this up a little bit earlier in terms of the rubrics. We're going to need to come up with what is an effective rubric for a STEM school, for example. There are a lot of schools right now that are calling themselves STEM schools, but are they meeting what our expectations are for STEM? Or are they actually integrating this in a way that we need to move forward? And that doesn't mean we're going to go up and just hammer down this is what it has to look like. It means we're going to have to work with people and sort of elevating what our expectations are. Do you want to add to that?
I hate the word rubric, but I was trying to think of what I call it, continuum, whatever. We'll figure that out before they get published.
I like the word
But we're not
rubric.
grading you on the rubric. It really will be different components. You'll look at it from an elementary lens, from a middle school lens, from a secondary lens, and then it will literally call out aspects, professional development. It's almost like STEM readiness, and it'll be on a continuum. So we're emerging maybe here, but we're rocking it over here. So it allows you to kind of do a self-assessment of where you are in STEM and where you can improve. So again, rubrics, we're not coming down and grading you from the state level, but it is something to help you grow as professionals, to help your schools grow, and to help your leaders grow.
So, in finalizing the state plan, even though that's turned in June, that means I have to have a lot of it gathered early in the winter and pretty much drafted out early spring to be able to get that going to where I want it to go. So as quickly as you can send me some of that information, I would appreciate that. That's what's going to help me. And I've already had an email from one school district that's willing to even sponsor a rural STEM meeting. But that information, get it to me sooner than later, so that way I can be part of that and I can make sure to get your voice and your regions in that as well. So I was going to say start at the tables, but I think we can just probably start right here because I want to be mindful of your time. Are there questions or ideas to share that you want to ask of us right now?
Right up here.
And please wait for a microphone to come around, so a microphone's coming.
Do you guys have some sort of plan as far as integrating this into public and private?
So Do you want to start with that, public and private? I think we can suggest for private once we put the plan out, but
When you say public or private, are you talking about schools or are you talking about, oh, okay. It's available for anyone. It's a Virginia STEM plan. So it's just communicating. And we all know in a big state like Virginia, how do we communicate this? So we're discussing many different ways of being able to post it, to market it, to sell it, to get it out to as many people as possible. There's always room to grow in that arena, right?
I will say that the Virginia independent colleges have been contacting me, and I've already been speaking at some of their meetings already about what's coming down the pipeline in terms of STEM walls. So I know that people are asking us for that information. I know if schools are going to be asked about this, we're definitely going to try to get the information out there. But I think that was an area that I wasn't sure.
Mm-hmm.
Is there another question?
Right here.
Oh, okay, both sides. If you want to start first.
Are there plans to come up with a bank of STEM lessons that would be appropriate for K through 12? And if there is, are teachers going to get paid to create those lessons, or how will that work?
Yes.
I appreciate that, and I'll gladly turn that over to her.
Yes, 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 yes. We are starting with computer science first because computer science is our biggest push because we have to implement them now. So we're already starting to build cross-disciplinary lessons for computer science. Then step 2 of that would be STEM. So how do we start creating STEM lessons? All of it will be available in the Open Educational Resource Repository. We have been building our secondary first, and not STEM, but in the content areas. That launches in January of 2020, and Open Educational Repository is all available for you. One-stop shop for lessons and resources for teachers. It's called Go Open Virginia, if you haven't heard of it. The second step of that building will be creating our lessons for elementary, and
Okay.
STEM are included on my plan.
What's that called again? A lot of people kind of looked up at it.
It's actually, because we're cool, hashtag Go Open VA. All right. But it is
Thank you.
our Open Educational Resource Repository. OER means not copyrighted, that you can pull things down, use them in any way that you want. You can remix them. You can put your own lessons up there. You can rate them. And like I said, that's launching
Okay.
in January of 2020. So look for that. And we have already professional development built within Virtual Virginia that you can take, and we'll have that course launched at the same time. So you'll learn how to use the repository.
So, Tina, what I'm going to do is, there's one last question, and then I'm going to do the last thing. Yes.
I think that you started to address this, but I was wondering if the the vision for STEAM and that plan was going to be developed with a consideration and alignment to the Virginia computer science standards. So you started to speak on that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, everything, we're very thoughtful computer science. Computer science is in every career now. I don't care where you go, right? You have to be a computational thinker. So computer science is at the forefront of our STEM work. Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I think it's a good start because we're talking about how to integrate it rather than just separate courses. So I think it's a good sort of starting path in terms of how do we integrate computational thinking and computer science into some of the other topics. And I think that's going to be a good inroads for how we do that in STEM. So again, being mindful of time, I wanted to make sure to put up my contact information, and I have some business cards here. I do know that Tina and I are going to be heading out pretty quickly, but our contact information is readily available, and I want to make sure you guys can reach out to me. So if you need to take a picture of that, and again, I'm giving my PowerPoints, so that way other people have it. I'd appreciate hearing from you. So thank you for your attention, and I hope you have a great day.
And I just want to say thank you for all you do. You guys are our early adopters. You're our innovators. You wouldn't be in this room if you weren't. So our work can't go forward without you at the grassroots level making it happen. So I just want you to say that from myself and from all of the Virginia Department of Education, we appreciate you guys so much. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Tina and Chuck, thank you very much for taking a lot of your time to come down today. Very informative presentation and the way ahead. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of advice and products from them. So just a small token of our appreciation for coming today. On behalf of the superintendent, the staff and faculty, and our great Corps of cadets, Thanks a lot for coming today.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Let's have one more.
Thank you.